Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1,000-year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to come. Now, the Lost Agent arc isn't the most bombastic storyline in Bleach by a long shot. It doesn't feature the biggest fights, the most powerful enemies, or the craziest power-ups. It's a relatively grounded, down-to-earth noir thriller that almost feels totally out of place within the narrative. And yet, despite all of that being true, the Lost Agent arc managed to introduce one of the most broken abilities in the entire series: Tsukishima's Book of the End. While most of the Fullbringers were fairly weak in the grand scheme of things, with niche powers that, while they often had a lot of potential and scope, simply weren't being used in such a way, Tsukishima and his power wrought havoc on Ichigo and his friends, essentially controlling the entire arc's direction with his single devastating ability. Thanks to Book of the End, Tsukishima is able to enact Ginjo's plan completely, driving Ichigo into a corner to bring him to the point of total despair, therefore finalizing his own Fullbring and enabling Ginjo to then take it for himself. Book of the End even allowed Tsukishima, a human, to fight on par with one of the strongest captains of the Gotei 13, forcing Byakuya to upend his normal fighting style in order to snatch a win. But while Book of the End's power is frightening enough to make the number 2 spot on my list of the most terrifying abilities in Bleach, there's actually more to it than meets the eye. I've always said that the simplest abilities in Bleach are often the strongest, and while Book of the End only possesses one core power, Kubo continued to add layers after layers over time, making it even more broken than you might think. In today's video, we're going to take a look at exactly why that is, and what really makes this Fullbring one of Bleach's greatest weapons. So, let's take a look. First of all then, what is Book of the End's ability? Tsukishima's Fullbring takes the form of a bookmark, and when he activates it, the bookmark transforms into a katana, the remains of the bookmark itself becoming the katana's guard. It's a really sleek and cool design in my opinion. Tsukishima's sword essentially has 2 different modes, which he can seemingly swap between without any kind of indication. The first is just a basic slash, like any regular sword, that has no secondary effect. The second, however, is much more dangerous, the actual Fullbring itself. By cutting someone or something with Book of the End, Tsukishima can insert himself into his target's past. When I say it's a simple ability, I mean it. That's literally its power. It's not a case of altering his victims' memories or their mind. It's not an illusion that forces them to see him as somebody else. Book of the End actually inserts Tsukishima as a person of note into his victim's life somewhere deep within their past. While we don't ever learn the specifics of how this actually works, Tsukishima is capable of deciding what form that will actually take. He can appear within his target's past either as a brand new entity, someone that technically never existed, which is his normal modus operandi, or he can replace a person of importance altogether, assuming that person's role in his target's life, though that often comes with greater risk. Let's take a look at some examples of how this works. Initially, after cutting Chad and Orihime, Tsukishima appears to them as a very dear friend. Someone who has been with them for a long time and even went so far as to help them in every aspect of their adventures so far. At this point, Tsukishima hasn't actually replaced anyone they know, but they believe he was there with them as part of their gang to help save Rukia and help defeat Aizen. He was there as himself at this point, just somebody they are great friends with. As far as they're concerned, they've walked every step of their life, with Tsukishima by their side. Later, when they begin to doubt the truth of their past, Tsukishima ups the ante, increasing the pressure by actively becoming someone in their life instead, actively usurping the role of someone who already existed. For example, in her past, Tsukishima tries to become Orehime's brother Sora, claiming to have rescued her from their parents, while for Chad, he tries to become his abuelo, claiming to have given him his treasured pendant. Tsukishima is truly terrifying because he makes you question what's actually real and what isn't. Who's telling the truth here and who's just crazy? This is because Tsukishima's power actually warps reality. For the target victim of Book of the End, Tsukishima is literally changing their past by adding a new presence to it that was never there previously. The specifics of how Book of the End actually works, like I said, are never delved into, and that's probably for the best. We don't see how Tsukishima chooses who to be or what part to play, but we can assume that he is flooded with information the moment he strikes someone. You see, Book of the End is a two-way street. For it to work the way it does, Tsukishima also needs to be affected by it. When he cuts someone, he too must change in order to be able to fulfill the proposed role. Let's look at another example, one that I think does a great job showing how Book of the End can be used in a versatile fashion. During their battle, Tsukishima cuts Byakuya and inserts himself into Byakuya's past, someone he has never met before until this fight, as his old mentor. Presumably, this is a made-up figure that Tsukishima has created, although it is highly likely that Byakuya had a mentor of some kind in his childhood. But by becoming the person who, and I quote, taught Byakuya everything he knows, that automatically means Tsukishima needs to know everything Byakuya can do in order to complete the fiction. Book of the End creates this imaginary figure within Byakuya's past. For the time Tsukishima is alive and his ability is active, that person actually exists. And at the same time, it gives Tsukishima information on everything he taught Byakuya to do. Every technique Byakuya has ever known, every spell he's ever used, every fight he's ever been involved in that this so-called mentor would know about. It's completely insane. The simplest way to put it is that Book of the End elevates Tsukishima to wherever he needs to be in order to play the person he claims to be. And this is a major point that we will get into towards the end of the video as well. In the example of his fight with Byakuya, Tsukishima learns the secret weakness of Senbonzakura, the aptly named safe zone, because of a manufactured conversation he claims to have had with Byakuya in the past. This is an interesting moment. While Byakuya accepts, thanks to Book of the End's ability, that Tsukishima has fought Senbonzakura countless times before in the past, in order to learn all of its tricks, he wonders where Tsukishima heard the term safe zone from, because presumably Byakuya has never told anyone else that explicit term. But Tsukishima simply says that he heard it from none other than Byakuya, both shocking the captain and essentially making it so. In the same way, Tsukishima tried to inflate his importance to both Chad and Orihime, becoming someone completely integral to them and their lives, someone pre-existing, he tries to do the same thing to Byakuya, although not in quite the same way. As far as we're aware, this time he doesn't try to become someone pre-existing in Byakuya's life, only he tries to increase the pressure by upping the ante. After Byakuya has struck him down with a fatal blow, Tsukishima has one last desperate trick up his sleeve. As Byakuya walks away, Tsukishima attempts to up the ante once more, going from being simply Byakuya's mentor to altering his position in Byakuya's past to someone who once saved Byakuya's life. And he can do this, it seems, with a simple sentence. Those words escaping from his lips are enough to alter the story of the past. This is, of course, another lie. Byakuya has never met Tsukishima before their battle. But Tsukishima is hedging his bets that Byakuya will honour that and save the life of the man who once saved his from some indeterminable peril. Of course it doesn't work. Even though Byakuya acknowledges that Tsukishima did in fact save his life, meaning Book of the End has at least had the requisite effect on the captain, he still wants him dead anyway for the damage and hurt he's done to Ichigo, and so Byakuya leaves Tsukishima to die regardless, foiling his final plan. As you can see, it's a genuinely crazy ability, one of the absolute strongest and scariest in the entire series. It's essentially a reverse-engineered version of Yhwach's the Almighty, where Yhwach can see and influence the future. Tsukishima can do the exact same, but to the past, thereby also influencing the present. Tsukishima's is a little weaker in the sense that he actually needs to cut somebody first, and his power can only affect those he cuts, whereas Yhwach can simply see the future of everyone and everything in a blanket state at all times before his eyes. This reality warping power of Tsukishima's has real, horrific consequences for those he targets. As we see when he worries that he's losing control over Chad and Orihime, that his control is slipping, Tsukishima attempts to tamper with their pasts even more, but he goes too far. Even under the influence of Book of the End, it's almost impossible for Chad and Orihime to believe Sora and Chad's abuelo simply didn't exist, but were in fact Tsukishima all along. This causes them both to suffer a mental breakdown, as this is a paradox too far. It's a step too far in Tsukishima's manufactured logic. But luckily they are saved by Kisuke and Isshin at the last moment. However, if they'd been left alone to suffer, they'd have been broken, as Ginjo puts it, perhaps irreparably. But the thing is, Book of the End just keeps on escalating. There's more to it even than that. Tsukishima's power works on inanimate objects too, which I do remember being a step too far for a lot of people in the community back in the day, when he nonchalantly revealed that yes, he can basically use his weapon on anything. They technically have a past, just like living creatures. Everything has a point of creation, and so that means they can be exploited by Book of the End. As we see in his battle against Byakuya, Tsukishima cuts the ground beneath their feet, and suddenly a massive trap detonates behind the captain as Tsukishima reveals that he's been here many times before, even though this digital realm was only created by Yukio mere minutes ago. Again, how this works we don't really know. Does time somehow slow down around Tsukishima, allowing him to actually lay a trap? Is it some kind of alternate parallel universe that's only accessible to Tsukishima via Book of the End that can then influence the timeline of the other universe? Does he simply envision the act of creating a trap in the past the moment he strikes the ground, and then it becomes a reality? So does he already need to know that which he wants to make real? The truly odd thing about this particular example, as I mentioned a minute ago, is that the digital battleground that they are in has only existed for as long as they've both been in it. It was set up specifically for this fight, so Tsukishima's Book of the End can seemingly build upon a past that's not actually there. And I was trying to come up with an answer as to why this would be possible, and I figured that maybe Tsukishima inserted himself into the realm's past as its creator. At that point, he would be able to essentially manufacture its past to be whatever he wants it to be. But it is weird, to say the least. Again, though, it is very similar to Yhwach's power, as we see Ichigo inadvertently activating traps the Quincy King has put there ahead of time. But you know what? Even after all of that, it gets better. Even after replacing someone real in his target's life, even after changing the past of an inanimate object, it gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective, I suppose. No, for the real reason why Book of the End is even more broken than you think, we have to go back to Tsukishima's battle with Byakuya once again, and an early example I brought up in this video. So, I mentioned earlier that when Tsukishima cuts someone, he gains the necessary information to be able to play the part of the person he's pretending to be. But of course, while it's technically a lie, it's also not a performance or playing pretend. Tsukishima's power warps reality, so the truth is that for while Book of the End is active, Tsukishima actually is that person to his targets. Before Tsukishima cuts Byakuya, he first cuts Senbonzakura itself, allowing the Fullbringer to insert himself into the past of Byakuya's Zanpakuto. This means Tsukishima instantly learns the ins and outs of Senbonzakura completely, having seen all of its abilities, even in bankai, countless times. Senkei, Gokei, and even Shukei Hakuteken. According to Tsukishima himself, this means he knows the perfect counters to them all as well, and will never be cut by Byakuya's sword again. You know what? Fine. That's understandable. As I mentioned, Tsukishima needs this information in order to actually be the person he has decided he's going to be. But it actually goes a step further than that. Book of the End increases Tsukishima's power and skills to the requisite level in order to facilitate who he supposedly is. After Tsukishima breaks Senbonzakura's blade in two during their battle, again, not something a human would be able to do, Byakuya muses that he never thought his last 17 months of training since the battle with Aizen would have been for nothing. But Tsukishima notes that the captain has improved, and his skills have sharpened since the last time they fought. It's just that his have improved by the same amount, putting him continuously a step ahead of the captain. In order to be Byakuya's mentor, Tsukishima's overall fighting ability had to be hugely enhanced by Book of the End, to put him on par with Byakuya in the first place. But then it was technically improved again to account for the additional 17 months of time that's passed since presumably they supposedly last met. It's just a completely unbelievable power that bypasses all training, all effort, and yes, all natural skill and talent. Book of the End is, as we've said, an ability that warps reality, meaning its effects are very real. And so when Tsukishima actually becomes the person in his target's past, he gains all the necessary boons to make that fiction a reality. In terms of motif, it is very similar to Ichibei's Ichimonji, which again is a Zanpakuto that's all about writing and rewriting essentially the rules of the Bleach universe. This is very similar, and that's the entire point of Tsukishima's character, of course. He's a blank slate, designed to be written and rewritten over and over again. That's why his motif is a bookmark, and that's why he's so enamored with novels. His power turns fiction into fact. And so, with all of that packaged up into one ability, it's not hard to see why Tsukishima's Book of the End is one of the most broken powers in Bleach. But I also really do love it. It's very creative, it's very frightening, and it brings with it a real sense of actual stakes, which I really do enjoy. As with other simple powers, it all stems from one nexus point, and then can branch out in so many different ways. Becoming a presence in someone's past is literally only the beginning. Tsukishima can manipulate the past of entire landscapes with a single stroke of his sword. He can witness and understand all techniques, including knowing how to perfectly counter each and every one, including a captain's bankai. And yes, to top it all off, his skill and abilities are improved to match. Basically, for another example, a much more simple example, were Tsukishima to have come up against Kenpachi in the Lost Agent arc, as was originally going to happen until Byakuya managed to get there first, if Tsukishima successfully cut Kenpachi with Book of the End and did the same thing he did with Byakuya, inserted himself into Kenpachi's past as a mentor of sorts who has seen everything Kenpachi can do, then Tsukishima's innate fighting ability, his power, his skills, all of that would be amplified in the present day to make it so that he could actually combat Kenpachi. It's completely ridiculous, but that is kind of why I love it. But that's it for the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Is Book of the End more broken than you thought it was originally? How crazy actually is this power? How strong is it compared to basically the rest of Bleach? Is the Almighty the only thing greater than this random Fullbringer's ability? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new here, guys. And as always, I want to end the video by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my supporters over on Patreon. I really do appreciate appreciate each and every one of you so, so very much. If you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and you want to support me over there as well, you can do just that to get your name in the credits like this and to get every video I release absolutely ad-free. Alright guys, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.